The silent twilight, when the sun didn't rise in Alaska, and humanity embraced the unseen. Welcome, intrepid adventurers of the past and solace seekers in the present, to another expansive, perhaps even mind-numbingly detailed journey on boring history to sleep. Tonight, we plunge into an abyss both literal and metaphorical, confronting a reality that, for most, lives only in the realm of nightmarish fiction. We are leaving the familiar contours of global cities and individual fortunes, venturing to the farthest reaches of a land both beautiful and brutal, Alaska. Our story is not one of a sudden catastrophe, a cataclysmic freeze, or an economic collapse. No, tonight we embark upon a prolonged, profound alteration of reality, a gradual immersion into perpetual night that lasted not days, but 65 seemingly endless rotations of the Earth. We ask, what was it like when the sun simply didn't rise in Alaska for 65 days, and life, in its indomitable, stubborn, perplexing way, went on? This isn't the dramatic, sudden darkness of a power outage or a total eclipse. This is a planetary phenomenon, the slow tilt of an entire world away from its fiery star, plunging a remote, rugged land into a prolonged, utterly natural, yet deeply unsettling cosmic night. My mind, and perhaps yours, recoils at the thought. Imagine waking, eating, working, loving, striving, dying, all beneath an unchanging, omnipresent cloak of impenetrable, yet often ethereal gloom. How does the human spirit adapt to such a fundamental rewriting of its most basic rhythm? How does a community, remote and vulnerable, find light and life when the ultimate source of both has retreated below the horizon, not for hours, but for more than 2 agonizing months? Tonight, we're peeling back the layers of our sun-drenched assumptions, digging into the very fabric of existence where day and night blur into a singular, unending twilight, to discover how a hardy people endured, adapted, and fundamentally redefined what it meant to live when the world outside stood cloaked in an endless shadow. It is a story of resilience, introspection, communal strength, and the peculiar beauty found in absolute darkness. Before we drift deeper into this extensive, perhaps even sleep-inducing exploration, I'm truly curious. From what corner of this often sunlit, often darkened globe are you currently listening? And what particular hour is holding court in your part of the world right now? Drop a comment below. It offers a profound, unifying comfort to know that even across such vast distances and differing temporal experiences, we are connected by this shared, quiet contemplation. The moment the sun finally dipped below the horizon for the very last time, marking the commencement of 65 days of unending night, wasn't a sudden, violent lurch into blackness. Rather, it was a protracted, agonizingly slow descent into a permanent, deepening twilight that began to subtly, yet inexorably permeate every aspect of existence, a gentle darkening that belied its profound, almost apocalyptic implications. For days leading up to what was known as the final sunset in our small, resilient community nestled at the edge of the Arctic Circle, the daylight had been dwindling, shaving minutes off our waking hours, shrinking from the brilliant clarity of autumn to the wan, pale luminescence of a perpetually overcast late November sky. This gradual contraction was less of an event and more of a protracted exhalation, a slow surrender of the world to an encroaching planetary shadow. My own recollection from those days, I was but a young adult, still possessing that youthful resilience often mistaken for invincibility, is marked less by specific events and more by a creeping atmospheric change. The sky, which had only weeks prior painted itself with vibrant hues of azure and cloud white, now possessed a pervasive, immutable grayness, a perpetual monochrome that flattened the world and rendered every landscape muted, indistinct, and vaguely sorrowful. Objects lost their sharp edges, colors muted into subtle variations of muted ochre, steel gray, and dull white. The sun, even on its brief daily appearances in the lead-up, was a tired, exhausted disk, skimming the southern horizon like a hesitant swimmer, unwilling to plunge into icy waters, casting long, distorted shadows that stretched to impossible lengths, twisting familiar objects into grotesque, elongated caricatures. Its light, no longer robust and invigorating, became anemic, lacking all power, shedding only a frigid, unconvincing illumination, like a dying ember offering the last gasp of its fiery essence before being extinguished entirely. The warmth it usually promised had long since vanished, replaced by a cutting wind that hinted at the brutal cold to come. Then came the day. There was a palpable sense of occasion, a communal breath held taut with anticipation, and, for many of the elders, a deep, knowing resignation that bordered on ancestral understanding. It was early afternoon when we gathered at the edge of the village, a small collective of hardy souls, our breaths pluming in frosty clouds, our faces etched with a mixture of solemnity and forced joviality, waiting for the celestial curtain call. The air was already impossibly cold, the kind of cold that pinched at exposed nostrils and stung the lungs with each inhalation, the sort that seemed to leach away warmth directly from the bone. The wind, ever present, gnawed at exposed skin. Overhead, the sky, a vast unbroken expanse of a peculiar, luminous violet gray, stretched infinitely, utterly indifferent to our mortal ceremony. The sun, finally, a low-slung, deeply exhausted sliver of incandescent orange, grazed the distant, unwavering curve of the southern horizon. It hovered there, seemingly reluctant, as if pausing to take a final, longing look at the world it was about to abandon. Its light, already weak and diffuse, bled out across the vast, frozen tundra, painting the distant snowfields in hues of faded apricot and bruised plum, creating a surreal, painterly masterpiece of natural resignation. Then, with an almost imperceptible shift, as if pulled by an invisible, slow-motion planetary string, it slipped, deliberately, completely, decisively, beneath the frozen rim of the earth. The transition wasn't immediate blackness. It was a lingering, drawn-out twilight that deepened incrementally, imperceptibly. For what felt like an hour, the sky held on to faint echoes of that vanished light, a delicate spectrum of pale lavender and faint rose fading into deeper and deeper shades of indigo. It was a silent, profound moment, a celestial turning point, an undeniable acknowledgement that an essential pillar of our reality had been gently yet definitively withdrawn. A hushed reverence fell over our small assembly, punctuated only by the crisp crunch of our boots on the compacted snow, the gentle sigh of the wind, and the shared exhalations of deeply felt communal understanding. Then an elder woman, her face a roadmap of ancient wisdom and endurance, simply pulled her fur hood tighter, nodded once, and softly said, in a voice like rustling leaves, "There, it is done." In her tone, there was no fear, no despair, only the profound weight of ancient acceptance, of a knowledge passed down through countless generations that had endured this cyclical cosmic abandonment before, and would, by necessity, endure it again. With her quiet pronouncement, the small group turned, our boots scuffing a solemn rhythm against the ice, our gazes directed not at the now empty horizon, but inward, towards the warm, flickering lights of the village. The final vestige of external daylight retreated, dissolving into a deepening violet, then a rich, velvety indigo, before settling into the pervasive, permanent, preternatural gloom that would soon define our lives for the next 65 bewildering, endlessly shadowed days. It wasn't the darkness of a deep cellar or a moonless forest night. It was an ethereal, all-encompassing shadow, sometimes softened by the distant pale shimmer of the aurora, or intensified by the thick blanket of Arctic cloud. This initial departure was simply the prelude, the opening of a vast, terrifying, yet ultimately mesmerizing chapter in our shared history, one that would redefine the very essence of light and life in its chilling, unyielding embrace. My internal clock, calibrated since birth to the sun's rhythm, immediately felt its subtle dissonance begin, a quiet alarm bell ringing in the absence of cosmic direction. The sheer vastness of the darkness, stretching out for unknown days, settled heavy in the pit of my stomach, a cold anchor to a profound, altered reality. As the sun officially surrendered to the perpetual night, a chilling psychological and physiological shift began to subtly, yet profoundly, grip our community. This was far more insidious than simply losing daylight. It was a fundamental decoupling from the Earth's most primal timer, leaving bodies and minds adrift in an unceasing sensory void. The phenomenon known as seasonal affective disorder, SAID, a generalized mood disorder intrinsically linked to the reduction of natural light, quickly permeated the very emotional fabric of the village, settling like another layer of ice around our collective consciousness. Initially, there was an almost defiant, collective sense of resolve. People would make jokes about it, scheduling elaborate indoor gatherings, consciously amplifying the warmth and light of their homes. But as the days bled into weeks and the sun remained an abstract, unremembered concept, the sheer, relentless oppression of the darkness began its quiet, debilitating work. My own sleep patterns became immediately, wildly disrupted. The body, without the bright blue light wavelengths of morning to suppress melatonin, remained in a perpetual state of evening. I'd often wake feeling utterly unrested, a pervasive sense of leaden fatigue clinging to my limbs, as if my very existence was being pulled back into the dense embrace of slumber. Falling asleep became a desperate battle against an overactive mind struggling to reconcile the eternal night outside with the body's innate desire for nocturnal rest. I'd often stare into the profound blackness, counted minutes that felt like hours, only to drift off into fragmented, disturbing dreams, vivid yet ephemeral, offering no real escape. The effect on general mood was undeniable, even among the most stoic and seasoned of Arctic dwellers. A pervasive, low-grade melancholia, a subtle despondency, settled over individuals like a fine dust. Conversations grew quieter, laughter a little less spontaneous, smiles a little more forced. There was a constant internal struggle to muster energy, to maintain enthusiasm for tasks that, under normal daylight, would feel mundane. Daily routines, once dictated by the external world's brightness, now had to be meticulously self-imposed, rigidly enforced, lest one surrender entirely to the pervasive languor of the polar night. Many of my neighbors, men and women usually known for their boundless energy and robust humor, retreated deeper into their homes, their public appearances less frequent, their interactions brief and subdued. Some reported an inexplicable craving for sugar and carbohydrates, a subconscious physiological attempt to find fleeting sources of energy or comfort in the relentless gloom. Arguments, fueled by a shorter fuse and amplified irritability, became more common in homes, though usually contained by the profound necessity of communal peace. Even cognitive function seemed subtly impaired. Tasks requiring concentration felt harder, focus more elusive. The world became duller, flatter, not just visually, but experientially. There was an overwhelming sense that time itself had somehow slowed or simply ceased its normal progression, suspended in an unceasing moment of profound, timeless darkness. For those already susceptible to mental health struggles, the polar night could be profoundly devastating. It amplified pre-existing conditions, pushing individuals closer to isolation and severe depression. The community's few informal support networks, reliant on observant neighbors and the proactive kindness of elders, strained under the collective weight of shared gloom. Even for the seemingly resilient, a pervasive question loomed: how much longer? Each passing day without sun wasn't just another 24 hours. It was a testament to the endurance of this unsettling, fundamental disconnection. The very concept of light, of day, became an abstract memory, its sensory details slowly fading, replaced by the profound, ubiquitous reality of an unending twilight. Our circadian rhythms, honed by millennia of planetary cycles, fought a losing battle against the unyielding celestial truth, leaving our bodies and minds in a state of subtle, yet pervasive, biological disorientation, turning existence into a constant, low-level, internal struggle against a profoundly unnatural, yet inescapable reality. As the pervasive darkness became our new, immutable reality, a profound reorganization of communal life was not just desirable, but absolutely essential for the survival and psychological well-being of our remote Arctic community. This wasn't simply a matter of enduring personal discomfort. It was a critical societal imperative, as the very rhythm of human existence pivoted from a reliance on the absent sun to an almost fervent dependence on mutual support and deliberately engineered pockets of shared light and warmth. Our village, a scattered collection of sturdy, insulated homes connected by unpaved, often ice-crusted paths, took on a distinct nocturnal cadence. Its external world rendered a muted monochrome under the constant leaden sky. Days became hours of a generalized morning or afternoon in our minds, dictated not by celestial bodies but by the hands on the clock and the ebb and flow of essential activity. Early efforts were consciously channeled towards communal maintenance. Paths had to be cleared, often by shovel in the ceaseless gloom, aided by headlamps. Limited supplies managed, generators fueled and serviced with an almost religious devotion, for they were the new sun. One of the most remarkable transformations occurred in the realm of social interaction. The inherent isolation that came with the profound darkness and cold demanded a compensating increase in internal cohesion. What had once been individual struggles quickly became collective responsibilities. Families drew closer, often retreating into the intimate, shared warmth of their living spaces, Doors, once largely closed, now became conduits for tentative inquiries. Are you well? Do you need anything? Have you seen Martha today? Neighbors, previously perhaps cordial but largely self-sufficient, now found themselves in a continuous dance of mutual support, a practical, unspoken agreement to watch over each other. My own sense of independence, often cherished in my youth, gave way to a profound, unsettling awareness of utter dependence on the resilience and vigilance of my community. Formal and informal gatherings, already a cornerstone of Arctic life, took on a heightened significance, transforming into essential communal rituals. These weren't just for socializing. They were deliberate acts of collective defiance against the darkness. People would gather in the few homes with larger communal spaces, or in the brightly lit, by generator of course, community hall, drawn by the twin magnets of shared warmth and manufactured light. Potluck dinners became celebrations. Stories were told with amplified drama against the intimate glow of kerosene lamps. Card games became fierce. Laughter rang out with a defiant edge, and music, often melancholic but powerfully resonant, filled the air, dispelling the quiet that often threatened to creep into our thoughts. These gatherings were crucial conduits for maintaining mental and emotional fortitude. In a world stripped of visual cues and external stimulation, the simple act of communal presence, the shared sound of human voices, the comfort of knowing others endured the same struggle, provided an indispensable anchor. Gossip, typically a harmless diversion, often served a vital social function, relaying bits of information, monitoring the well-being of the elderly or the isolated, collectively identifying potential concerns that needed addressing. The role of the elders, those repositories of ancient knowledge and proven resilience, became particularly pronounced. They spoke of cycles, of patience, of traditional methods for managing the darkness that predated modern technology. Their calm assurances a powerful balm against mounting anxiety. They taught by example, reminding us of the cyclical nature of even this extreme event, subtly embedding the promise of eventual return, that the sun, though gone, was not lost forever. Their stories, often recounting triumphs over impossible odds in previous polar nights, wove a narrative of endurance, subtly instructing the younger generations in the art of mental and spiritual resilience. Our small Arctic community, pushed to its existential limits, paradoxically discovered a deeper, more profound sense of interconnectedness, its members bound by the common struggle against an unrelenting, pervasive darkness. Life, indeed, went on, but it did so by retreating inward, consolidating, and drawing strength from the flickering, defiant light of shared humanity. Beyond the intimate huddle of human warmth and shared emotional labor, the profound and unrelenting darkness necessitated a complete reimagining of the economic and logistical lifeblood of our remote Arctic community. This wasn't simply a matter of shifting hours. It was an existential challenge to the very systems that kept us fed, fueled, and functioning. Our small, isolated village existed in a delicate balance with nature, but also relied on critical external supplies that were now at the mercy of unprecedented conditions. Firstly, consider the profound impact on traditional subsistence activities, the age-old practices of hunting, fishing, and trapping that formed a crucial bedrock of our diet and culture. Fishing through ice holes continued, but with immensely amplified difficulty. The ceaseless darkness meant navigating vast, indistinguishable expanses of frozen ocean, not by sight, but by memory, by the subtle shift of currents felt underfoot, and by the faint glow of powerful headlamps, their beams piercing only a finite sphere of swirling frost. Ice thickened dramatically without the warming hint of sunlight, demanding heavier, more dangerous equipment to maintain fishing holes. Trapping, too, became an endeavor of amplified risk. Laying and checking traps in the perpetual gloom, in extreme cold, exposed trappers to greater risks of frostbite, disorientation, and accidental falls in terrain rendered alien by the absence of visual cues. The cold itself created new challenges, hardening both the earth and the prey, making retrieval arduous and the very act of butchering, a vital preservation step, an immediate battle against frozen meat. Any minor injury could become life-threatening in the darkness and cold, far from medical assistance. The external supply chain, however, represented the more pervasive and arguably more anxiety-inducing challenge. Our community, like many in the Alaskan Arctic, relied heavily on sporadic air transport for crucial goods. Fresh produce, which, even when it arrived, often barely survived the transit in edible condition. Vital machine parts for snowmobiles and generators, medicine, construction materials, and non-local foodstuffs. As the perpetual darkness and extreme cold settled in, flying conditions became exceptionally treacherous. Runways, often mere compacted ice and snow, were harder to light adequately for safe landing. Fuel, expensive at the best of times, was even more precious when planes had to idle longer or navigate complex flight paths in absolute darkness, contending with unseen hazards. Weather delays became not just frustrating, but often days-long ordeals, further delaying critical resupplies. There was no next-day delivery. It was a hopeful, tenuous gamble against the elements. Pilots, hardy and experienced as they were, pushed their limits, knowing the entire village's well-being literally rested on their shoulders. When a supply plane was due, a palpable buzz of anticipation would fill the community center, our makeshift air traffic control listening to crackling radio reports, only to deflate with a communal sigh if the landing was scrubbed due to visibility or worsening winds. This unreliable supply created a constant, pervasive underlying anxiety about resource management. Every item that came in was precious. Every bit of food was carefully rationed. Every spare part for a generator became an object of almost sacred reverence, knowing that its replacement might be weeks away. This immense strain on external logistics led to increased local energy consumption as well, a vicious cycle that drained resources further. More artificial lighting was needed, and not just in homes. Workplaces, the school, the store, the community hall, roads, where critical markers now glowed faintly with battery-powered lights, and any essential outdoor tasks, like fueling the municipal generators themselves, all demanded power. This meant an astronomical increase in demand for kerosene for lamps, generator fuel, and replacement batteries for essential flashlights and lanterns. Local fuel storage dwindled at an accelerated rate, fueling renewed fears about what would happen if the winter persisted and a vital resupply was canceled. It became a profound, existential battle against the logistics of basic life support in an environment actively, aggressively hostile to human endeavors. Your perceived quality of life, which in other climates often rests on convenience and abundance, Here came down to sheer resilience and the precarious, delicate balance of fuel, spare parts, and the infrequent drone of a distant cargo plane breaking through the pervasive, suffocating darkness. A reminder that despite our endurance, we were fundamentally tethered to an unpredictable, increasingly strained world beyond the confines of our immediate, perpetually dark community. The physical landscape, already unforgiving under normal winter conditions, transformed into something far more dangerous and utterly alien under the ceaseless, smothering blanket of polar night. Navigating this altered world demanded a constant, heightened state of vigilance, where every step was a calculated risk, and the invisible hazards lurking in the profound gloom became potential killers. This wasn't just a chilly walk in the park. It was an active negotiation with an environment fundamentally recalibrated by the absence of light and the brutal reality of sustained, extreme cold. The air, perpetually in the negative Fahrenheit, gained a distinct, almost tactile density. It felt heavy, filled with unseen particles of supercooled moisture, and stung at exposed skin with an almost physical pain, instantly making fingers ache and forcing immediate retreat if they weren't thickly gloved. The wind, relentless and unforgiving, compounded this agony, carving intricate patterns of suffering across any uncovered skin and finding purchase in even the thickest layers of clothing, leaching away body heat with ruthless efficiency. Frostbite, always a concern in Arctic winters, now became a pervasive, insidious threat, striking silently and swiftly. It wasn't just a concern for those foolish enough to be outside without proper gear. It was a danger during even brief excursions, a chilling, rapid numbing that could permanently alter a digit within minutes. Checking on traps or visiting a neighbor meant wrapping oneself in layer upon layer of traditional caribou or modern synthetic materials, obscuring vision and sound, but providing the only reliable defense against a truly lethal cold. The pervasive darkness created a disorienting topography that defied easy understanding. Even familiar paths, well trodden and ingrained in muscle memory, became treacherous obstacle courses. Drifting snow, constantly shifted by unseen currents of wind, obscured icy patches beneath, transforming solid ground into perilous camouflage traps. The snow itself developed a crystalline hardness, turning sidewalks into gleaming sheets of concrete-like ice, requiring specialized footwear and a slow, methodical shuffle to prevent crippling falls. Injuries from slips and tumbles, broken wrists, sprained ankles, concussions, skyrocketed during these months, turning mundane journeys into life-threatening gambles in a medical system already strained by the cold. Our traditional understanding of visual depth perception, normally so innate and reliable, was rendered utterly useless. The world became a flat monochromatic canvas, details dissolving into shades of gray. A slight dip in the snow could be a major ditch, a subtle rise in the ground an icy, steep incline. Even with powerful headlamps, their beams pierced only a finite, tunneling sphere of the immediate surroundings, leaving the periphery in deep, unfathomable blackness, fostering a profound sense of claustrophobia despite the vastness of the tundra around us. The omnipresent deep darkness had another more unsettling implication for physical safety: the emboldening of certain wildlife. Without the inhibitory effect of even short daylight hours, some predatory animals, notably polar bears and wolves, could wander closer to the fringes of the village. their presence a silent, unseen threat magnified by the low visibility. Trappers returning from their lines, or families making brief outdoor trips between houses, were now advised to carry firearms, their ears strained for any sound that betrayed a looming presence, their limited sight constantly searching for unmoving shapes against the endless gray. The danger wasn't just physical exposure to the cold, it was the psychological burden of navigating a world where unseen threats, both environmental and biological, were amplified by the cloak of eternal night. Maintaining physical health and hygiene under these extreme conditions became a demanding, multifaceted daily struggle. Water, precious and often acquired by melting snow, was rigorously rationed, limiting personal hygiene to essential sponge baths and conserving precious supplies for drinking and rudimentary cooking. Clean clothes, often scarce, were constantly battling against the accumulation of grime and moisture, fostering a pervasive, subtle unease. Access to fresh produce, already limited by supply chain disruptions, virtually vanished, pushing our diets towards calorically dense but nutrient-poor canned goods, dried meats, and preserved foods. This dietary shift, lacking essential vitamins and minerals, contributed to general lethargy and compromised immune systems, making people more susceptible to illness at a time when medical resources were critically stretched. Our very physical endurance, tested by the unrelenting cold and constant vigilance, became the metric of survival, transforming ordinary living into a sustained, arduous battle against the harsh, unforgiving realities of an endless Arctic night. The social fabric of our remote Alaskan village, typically hardy and accustomed to the seasonal extremes, underwent a remarkable and deeply complex metamorphosis when the sun finally withdrew for 65 days. This wasn't a period of societal stagnation. Rather, it was a dynamic, almost constant process of redefinition, as daily life pivoted profoundly inward, simultaneously fostering immense psychological fortitude, and occasionally straining the very bonds it sought to strengthen. The blurring of day and night, the relentless absence of celestial cues, meant that time, as a linear, universally understood progression, began to lose its traditional meaning. Calendars and clocks became external constructs, arbitrary divisions against an unvarying canvas of gray-black. For individuals, this often manifested in a subtle disorientation, a feeling of floating unmoored from the universal rhythm. But for the community, it demanded a new, consciously crafted adherence to a rigid schedule, self-imposed with almost religious fervor. Designated hours for morning activities, breakfast, chores, light work, for a midday gathering, for evening meals, and, crucially, for rest, irrespective of the external gloom. Without these internal anchors, the collective sense of purpose, of continued existence beyond mere survival, would quickly dissolve into an oppressive, unceasing languor. The dominant mode of life transitioned profoundly from external engagement to intense, intimate domesticity. Homes, once serving as mere sleeping and eating hubs during long, bright Alaskan summer days spent outdoors, now became primary centers of activity, warmth, light, and interaction. They transformed into cherished multifunctional havens, veritable cocoons against the relentless darkness and brutal cold outside. People spent exponentially more time indoors, creating a double-edged sword of emotional experience. For families, this enforced proximity often led to a heightened sense of intimacy. strengthening familial bonds through shared adversity and continuous coexistence. Children learned new board games, storytelling flourished, traditional crafts were dusted off and revived, and communal meals took on a new, almost ritualistic significance, extending far beyond mere sustenance to become cherished acts of connection. The sounds of hushed conversations, the crackle of a wood-burning stove, where available and safely used, the quiet murmuring of tales and songs. These formed a new domestic soundscape, warm and comforting amidst the pervasive silence. However, this same intense proximity could also be a source of significant strain. Minor disagreements, petty annoyances, and simmering resentments usually dissipated by outdoor activity or external distractions, became magnified and inescapable within the confined spaces. The very intimacy could feel suffocating, a psychological burden that frayed nerves already stretched taut by the profound darkness and general anxiety. Patience, always a virtue, became an essential survival skill. Children, often surprisingly adaptable, exhibited their own unique coping mechanisms. Play migrated entirely indoors, becoming more imaginative, focused on intricate, constructed worlds rather than expansive outdoor exploration. Their inherent curiosity for light often led them to gravitate towards the brightest corners of homes or the illuminated communal spaces, their laughter a precious, defiant antidote to the encompassing gloom. Education, already a challenge in remote areas, faced further hurdles as transportation became treacherous and power intermittent. Yet, the dedicated teachers and parents adapted, converting homes into makeshift classrooms, embracing more experiential, story-based learning that leaned into the cultural heritage of the community. For me, witnessing this profound societal shift, this deliberate inward turn, brought a mixture of awe and melancholy. Awe at the sheer resilience, the collective human ingenuity to reinvent joy and purpose in such stark conditions, and melancholy for the sheer scale of adaptation, for the quiet sacrifice of individual autonomy to the overwhelming imperative of collective survival and psychological stability. Life went on, yes, but it did so by reshaping its very contours, embracing a more intimate, intense, and profoundly shared existence within the radiant, artificial glow of strategically conserved warmth and light, turning the claustrophobic into the communal. The perpetual darkness, coupled with the profound and relentless cold, revealed a stark truth about human beings when divorced from their primary celestial guide. The delicate reliance of our biological clocks, our circadian rhythms, on the presence of natural light, and the subsequent psychological and physical struggles to recalibrate. My own body, for instance, immediately rebelled against this cosmic incongruity, manifesting a symphony of subtle, yet pervasive, biological disturbances that gnawed at my sense of well-being. Sleep became less a restful embrace and more a fragmented, confusing battle against a perpetually alert nervous system. Without the daily cue of a rising sun to trigger the cessation of melatonin production and initiate cortisol release, the natural wake-up hormone, my brain seemed to remain in an unending twilight mode. I would frequently drift off for a few hours, only to awaken with a jolt, uncertain of the actual time, convinced that some invisible cosmic event had changed. These nocturnal awakenings were disorienting. In the utter external blackness, determining if it was 2 a.m. or 10 a.m. became a mere guesswork, leading to a pervasive, low-level anxiety that colored my subsequent attempts at rest. The sleep I did manage to achieve often felt shallow, unrefreshing, a restless skirmish against a perpetually murky subconscious. This profound sleep disturbance rapidly translated into a palpable sense of leaden fatigue that clung to me throughout my waking hours. Even after what I perceived as adequate rest, my limbs felt heavy, my mind sluggish, operating as if permanently encased in a thick, insulating layer of mental cotton. Tasks that required focused attention, quick problem-solving, or even creative thought became inexplicably harder, taking longer and requiring greater deliberate effort. This wasn't merely tiredness, it was a deeper, more systemic exhaustion, as if my body was struggling against a profound internal dissonance, a constant biological conflict between its ancient programming and the new, unnatural external reality. Beyond sleep and cognitive function, there were subtle yet pervasive shifts in overall mood and emotional regulation. A general melancholia, a subtle despondency settled over individuals like an invisible shroud. This wasn't necessarily clinical depression for all, but a pervasive dimming of emotional vitality, a decreased capacity for spontaneous joy, and a heightened irritability that made small frustrations loom larger. Light therapy, now a well-established treatment for SAD, was, in that era, a rudimentary and relatively unknown concept. Those few bright, full-spectrum incandescent bulbs, or nascent fluorescent fixtures we managed to keep powered, were purely for illumination, not for therapeutic effect, though their sheer brilliance undoubtedly provided some, however unconscious, psychological uplift. The instinctual desire for light, any light, was profound, drawing us towards windows during moments of noon, straining for a glimmer that would never arrive, or towards any brightly lit communal space. Even appetite and basic metabolic functions seemed subtly altered. Many reported an increased craving for sugary, calorically dense, carbohydrate-heavy foods, a primal attempt to fuel bodies and minds struggling against both external cold and internal sluggishness. This often led to an insidious weight gain that compounded feelings of lethargy. Without the robust natural rhythm, our entire internal ecosystems felt subtly, yet persistently, out of balance. It was an enduring, deeply personal battle against a profound cosmic shift. My strongest coping mechanism became an almost fanatical adherence to the mechanical clock and the rigid schedule it imposed. Breakfast at 8 a.m. despite the blackness, work duties precisely on time, dinner at 6 p.m., storytelling and communal engagement after. It was an imposed order, an artificial rhythm, desperately needed to combat the profound, disorienting chaos that the absence of the sun brought to my own body and mind. It taught me, with a humbling, unforgettable lesson, the extent to which our most basic sense of well-being is intricately, existentially tied to the steady, unyielding presence of the simple, reassuring, and utterly fundamental light of the sun, making its profound absence a deeply unsettling, ceaseless inner struggle. The unforgiving reality of living through 65 days of polar night profoundly magnified every aspect of physical well-being, stripping away the cushioning luxuries of temperate climates and revealing the raw, elemental struggle for health and comfort. For our remote Alaskan community, already attuned to seasonal rigors, this extended period of darkness and extreme cold presented a multi-layered gauntlet of physical challenges that demanded relentless vigilance and strategic adaptation, making simple survival itself an act of quiet triumph. Firstly, and perhaps most immediately, was the relentless, invasive cold itself, reaching and often surpassing temperatures of -40 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chills that made it feel exponentially colder. This wasn't just a factor of discomfort, it was a pervasive, existential threat to the integrity of the human body. Frostbite became an insidious enemy, capable of seizing exposed skin in mere minutes, particularly in the constant low light that made discerning early warning signs difficult. Any time spent outdoors, even for vital chores like checking trap lines, collecting firewood, or servicing external generators, was a calculated risk, necessitating elaborate layering of traditional fur, wool, and modern synthetics, leaving one bulky, cumbersome, and often prone to accidents from restricted movement. Injuries, even minor ones like falls on unseen black ice, a persistent menace in the perpetual twilight, became far more serious propositions, compounded by slower response times from overstretched emergency services and the increased risk of hypothermia for anyone immobilized or exposed for too long. A simple, twisted ankle could turn into a life-threatening situation, forcing communal ingenuity to manage pain and provide basic care, where a trip to the nearest distant fully functional hospital might be days, if not weeks, away. Beyond immediate injury, maintaining fundamental hygiene proved to be an incessant, energy-draining battle against dwindling resources and logistical hurdles. Water, which became an increasingly precious commodity, often sourced from meticulously melted snow or carefully thawed ice, a laborious process itself demanding fuel and time, was rigorously rationed. This severely limited access to essential personal, bathing, hand-washing, and overall cleanliness, contributing to a pervasive sense of grime that affected both morale and heightened the risk of minor infections spreading throughout the community. Laundry, an ongoing necessity, became an epic endeavor, often necessitating primitive hand-washing techniques in rapidly cooling water, and then attempting to dry clothing indoors, a challenge that exacerbated moisture issues, or risking frozen stiff garments outdoors. This perpetual fight against dirt and discomfort added another layer of daily exhaustion to already stretched reserves. Then came the profound challenge of nutrition. The delicate modern reliance on fresh produce, vegetables, fruits, dairy, completely vanished. Supply chains were so severely disrupted that even when a cargo plane could land, fresh items often did not survive the transit or were astronomically priced beyond reach. Our diets consequently reverted to the calorically dense but nutrient-poor staples of dried goods, preserved meats, root vegetables, where possible, canned foods, and heavily processed shelf-stable items, while adequate calories were generally found to ward off immediate hunger. This pervasive lack of essential vitamins, minerals, and fresh fiber contributed significantly to generalized lethargy, suppressed immune systems, and digestive complaints. People became more susceptible to the common cold, respiratory infections, and a general lowering of physical vitality, all at a time when medical resources were stretched to their absolute breaking point, and basic antibiotics or common cold remedies might be critically scarce. The persistent physical demands of existing in constant extreme cold, the body expending significantly more energy just to maintain core temperature, the strain on the cardiovascular system, The pervasive dryness of the artificially heated, often stale, indoor air, leading to skin irritation and respiratory issues, combined with disrupted sleep, nutritional deficits, and amplified anxiety, resulted in a pervasive, low-level physical breakdown. This state of constant physiological stress required immense, concerted effort just to maintain basic health. People visibly aged over the 2 months. Faces were drawn, eyes tired, movements often slow and deliberate. For those already struggling with chronic health conditions, the polar night was a severe, often terminal exacerbation. Even those who appeared robust outwardly often harbored silent internal struggles, their bodies protesting against the profoundly unnatural demands placed upon them by the unyielding darkness and cold. My own body, a sturdy vessel accustomed to Arctic resilience, groaned under the continuous strain. Every ache became amplified, every shiver a reminder of the insidious internal war waged to maintain warmth, transforming the mundane act of physical endurance into a defining, silent, moment-to-moment triumph over nature's cruel indifference, forcing an unprecedented level of respect for our own finite biological limits against the sheer, overwhelming, uncompromising might of an endless winter. In the stark embrace of the enduring polar night, where familiar markers of time and progress dissolved into a ceaseless twilight, the absence of natural daylight triggered not just physical adaptation, but also a profound re-evaluation of social and ethical norms within our remote Arctic community. Life indeed went on, but it did so in a deeply altered societal landscape, where concepts of community support and vigilant observation became both a necessity and a delicate tightrope walk over profound personal vulnerability. Crime, often perceived as an inevitable byproduct of darkness and isolation in urban settings, took on a nuanced, complex character in our small village. One might expect a surge in opportunistic crime under the cloak of unending night. However, what we witnessed was often a paradoxical blend of heightened solidarity, reinforced by mutual dependency, subtly interspersed with instances of desperate improvisation, and occasionally petty opportunism that rarely escalated to outright malice. Major, violent crime was remarkably low. The very nature of our remote, interconnected community acted as an invisible deterrent. Anonymity, a hallmark of urban transgression, simply did not exist. Everyone knew everyone. Reputations were paramount, forged over generations, and the shame associated with blatant criminality within such a close-knit group was a powerful inhibitor. Furthermore, the sheer, unrelenting, cold, and pervasive darkness made large-scale criminal enterprises virtually impossible. What would one steal, and where would one go? Mobility was curtailed, escape routes non-existent, and hiding was a desperate, energy-draining endeavor. However, localized minor transgressions, a borrowed can of fuel from an unattended shed, a suspiciously missing food item from a less secure communal storage, did occur, fueled not by greed, but by genuine, terrifying desperation as individual supplies dwindled. These were usually met with swift, often community-driven forms of accountability, a shame-based social justice system where public disapproval could be a far harsher punishment than any formal legal process. Children, those small resilient barometers of adaptation, coped with the ceaseless darkness with a blend of youthful flexibility and palpable confusion. For them, the polar night was their extended normal winter, but with an intensity no summer-born adult could truly recall. The usual external stimulation of playing outdoors, running freely in the bright light, chasing, exploring, digging, were utterly absent. Their entire world constricted to the warmer, brighter, artificial confines of homes, the community center and the school. Their boundless energy, instead of being dissipated by external play, now had to be channeled indoors. Games became intricate, imaginary, whispered narratives, enacted in lamplit rooms. Storytelling, often amplified by the elders' cultural tradition, flourished, captivating young minds and transporting them beyond the literal darkness outside their window. These tales of heroism, of legendary hunts in an earlier, brighter world, or of enduring great trials, subtly imparted the resilience and wisdom of their ancestors. But even their youthful spirits contended with challenges. Sleep routines for children, dependent as much on external light as adults, became irregular, leading to increased crankiness and difficulty in concentrating. Teachers, deeply empathetic to these unique burdens, adjusted curricula, shortening outdoor physical education, if any existed, now a bundled, supervised march, and prioritizing mental well-being, reading, and culturally significant art and crafts. Schools became brightly lit bastions of warmth and normalcy, a cherished haven offering a semblance of structured routine that became a vital psychological anchor for children. My own memories include witnessing children, usually boisterous and prone to outdoor adventures, becoming strangely subdued during the middle day hours, then inexplicably energetic as the artificial evening light faded and bedtime loomed, their bodies hopelessly confused by the unchanging external gloom. The social gatherings that defined adult communal life intensified exponentially during the deepest stretches of the night. Community dances, potluck dinners, card game tournaments, and storytelling sessions took on a vital, almost ritualistic significance. These weren't merely entertainments. They were profound acts of collective psychological resilience, communal celebrations of shared existence, in defiance of the omnipresent darkness. The constant background drone of the generator, the flickering gas lamps, the shared warmth, and the cacophony of human voices, all served as powerful psychological bulwarks against the isolating, often melancholic grip of the eternal night outside. The focus shifted from material achievements to the profound value of human connection, of empathy, of listening. Conversations deepened, anecdotes stretched longer, and laughter, though sometimes tinged with an underlying weariness, rang out with an almost defiant spirit. The inherent vulnerability that comes with a shared, sustained struggle for existence created an unexpected level of intimacy and trust, fostering bonds that often far outlasted the returning sun. The darkness didn't just blanket the physical world, it reshaped the very fabric of our social contracts, revealing the raw, elemental human need for connection, purpose, and mutual reassurance in a world rendered profoundly strange and utterly relentless. Life in the dark went on not as a testament to individual triumph, but as a monument to collective adaptation, driven by shared warmth, collective wisdom, and a profound, defiant commitment to keep the flame of community alive, even when the greatest flame in the sky had entirely vanished. One of the defining contrasts between a typical, daylight-driven existence and the protracted gloom of polar night lay in the fundamental relationship we developed with artificial light. This wasn't merely a technological adaptation. It was an emotional, almost reverential connection to every flickering bulb, every precious generator, as they became our defiant, ephemeral suns in a world swallowed by darkness. Our reliance on technology, while basic by today's standards, was absolutely paramount and fraught with its own set of relentless anxieties. Electricity, that lifeblood of warmth and light, came almost entirely from diesel-fueled generators. These machines, often old, prone to mechanical fatigue, and struggling against the brutal cold that thickened lubricants and strained components, required meticulous, constant maintenance and an almost fanatical devotion to fuel rationing. Every tank of diesel brought into the village by plane or sporadic ice road delivery was measured, tracked, and planned for with agonizing precision. A single breakdown, a missed delivery, a crucial component failure, meant an immediate and profound return to absolute darkness and brutal cold for sections of the village, turning any remaining heat source into a highly rationed lifeline. The drone of these generators, typically an annoyance, transformed into a constant, strangely comforting symphony. The steady hum was the very sound of survival, a mechanical heartbeat defying the Arctic gloom. A sudden sputter or shift in pitch would send shivers of anxiety down one's spine, prompting immediate inspection and urgent calls to the village mechanics, those unsung heroes whose hands, perpetually stained with grease and perpetually chilled, literally kept our light and warmth alive. Individual homes relied on a patchwork of light sources, each with its own advantages and desperate limitations. Battery-powered flashlights, precious and consuming finite energy cells, became indispensable tools for navigation, checking on children, or small chores, their beams cutting sharp, ephemeral tunnels through the pervasive gloom. Their use was rigorously disciplined, ensuring crucial reserves for emergencies. Kerosene lamps, with their warm, yellow, flickering glow, offered a more ambient, consistent, but less powerful illumination. The scent of kerosene, typically pungent and cloying, transformed into a comforting aroma, the smell of warmth, of extended reading, of familial gathering. Their gentle light softened the harshness of the darkness, lending a peculiar, sepia-toned intimacy to our homes, but also bringing the constant, nagging concern of fire risk, a devastating prospect in such cold isolation. Headlamps, strapped to foreheads, freed hands for chores, for hunting, for navigating the treacherous outdoors, their single beam cutting a defiant path through the utter blackness of the tundra. Each flickering lumen, each precious kilowatt, each burning drop of fuel was not just a utility. It was a conscious, guarded victory against the overwhelming might of the polar night, managed with a meticulousness that permeated every waking hour. Communication, outside of face-to-face contact, was primitive and often tenuous. Hand-crank radios, if we were fortunate enough to possess them, or larger battery-powered shortwave radios, provided intermittent, static-filled connections to distant regional news, occasional weather updates, always grim, or emergency alerts from far-off government stations. These brief, fleeting glimpses into an external world operating under a different sun provided both essential information and profound anxiety. What if the nearest city was also grappling with unheard-of challenges? Was anyone coordinating relief? Was a thaw truly on its way? The ambiguity and the inherent limitations of these fragile communication lines only reinforced our sense of isolation, further embedding us into the self-reliance of our local community. In a fundamental way, the technology we possessed wasn't a source of overwhelming liberation, but a constant, low-level anxiety. It didn't solve the core problems of the dark and cold. It merely, and preciously, kept the flickering flames of human life and social cohesion alive against an aggressive, relentless existential assault. Each hum, each glow, each signal became a profoundly charged symbol, reminding us hourly that survival was an active, deliberate, technologically precarious choice, a daily victory earned through the grinding efforts of mechanics, fuel haulers, and the simple, persistent flipping of a switch. The relentless pressure of perpetual darkness, coupled with extreme cold and isolation, profoundly affected the human spirit in our Alaskan village. Yet it also revealed a remarkable resilience nurtured through deep cultural and spiritual practices that predate written history. Life didn't merely go on in the dark. It delved deeper into itself, finding light and meaning in ancestral wisdom and collective introspection. For indigenous communities of the Arctic, polar night is not a surprise or an anomaly. It is a profound, cyclical reality, woven into the very fabric of their oral histories, spiritual beliefs, and enduring cultural practices. The absence of the sun is a part of their worldview, not an alien invasion, granting a unique framework for psychological and spiritual endurance that outsiders often lacked. The elders, those living repositories of collective memory and profound practical wisdom, assumed a heightened significance during these months. They didn't just share survival tips. They narrated endless, intricate stories by the flickering glow of kerosene lamps, weaving tales of mythological heroes traversing boundless darkness, of resilient ancestors triumphing over starvation and unimaginable cold, of clever animals outwitting unseen dangers. These stories, far from being mere entertainment, served as vital psychological anchors. They were coded lessons in patience, in perseverance, in communal responsibility, in understanding the deep cyclical nature of time, reminding us that even the darkest nights give way to dawn. They subtly yet powerfully conveyed the profound reassurance that we have been here before, and we will emerge again, granting a vital historical perspective against mounting personal anxiety. Ceremonies and rituals, often practiced year-round, took on an amplified potency during the polar night, transforming into communal affirmations of shared identity and spiritual strength. Gatherings for drumming and singing, usually vibrant and energetic, became deeply soulful, their rhythmic pulse a defiant beat against the encompassing quiet, a call for connection beyond the tangible. The sounds filled the often claustrophobic indoor spaces, uniting participants in a collective experience that transcended the immediate physical hardship. Feasting, always a communal celebration, took on a deeper meaning. Even with meticulously rationed food, small feasts of dried meat, preserved berries, and traditional preparations became acts of thanksgiving, defiant expressions of gratitude for communal resilience and continued existence, fostering immense psychological warmth that radiated from within. There was a heightened reverence for the aurora borealis when it graced our star-pierced skies. The spectral dancing lights, a glorious palette of shimmering green, ethereal violet, and faint wispy pink, cutting across the infinite blackness above, became not just a beautiful natural phenomenon, but a profound, almost spiritual beacon. For some, it was a reminder of the universe's deeper rhythms, a promise of hidden beauty even in profound darkness, a sign that celestial forces beyond human comprehension still danced above, unseen by day but vibrant in the eternal night. This awe, this visceral connection to the cosmos, served as a powerful antidote to the creeping despair and psychological confinement. The long nights also fostered an innate introspection, a deepening of personal and communal reflection. Without the relentless visual stimulation and external distractions of a sunlit world, minds were encouraged to turn inward, to contemplate deeper questions, to engage in extended periods of contemplation and internal dialogue. For me, this meant grappling with anxieties, certainly, but also experiencing unexpected moments of clarity, of a deeper appreciation for simple acts, the warmth of a fire, the shared glance with a neighbor, the sound of a loved one's breathing in the dark. It taught me that light, true and enduring, could indeed be found within, that the human spirit possesses an internal luminescence capable of defying even the most absolute, protracted external darkness. The Arctic silence, initially a source of dread, transformed into a peculiar, almost sacred canvas, against which the subtle, resilient tapestry of cultural practice, ancestral wisdom, and spiritual fortitude played out, reminding us that life's profoundest meaning often lies not in what we gain from the outside world, but what we cultivate, share, and preserve from within, even when the world's greatest lamp has turned away. As the ceaseless days of polar night inexorably bled into weeks, stretching towards the promised horizon of the sun's eventual return, an almost electric current of subtle anticipation began to charge the air within our remote Alaskan community. This wasn't a sudden eruption of frantic hope, but a gradual, slow, deeply ingrained awakening, as the cumulative wisdom of countless generations whispered that the universe's clock, though slow, was also inexorable. The darkest point, the longest shadow, always had a counterpoint in the slow, gradual return of the light. For a full 2 months we had existed beneath the unyielding canvas of a perpetually darkened sky, punctuated only by the distant stars, the ethereal shimmer of the aurora, or the persistent glow of our defiant artificial lights. The sensory deprivation had been profound. Our bodies and minds had, out of necessity, recalibrated to the rhythm of mechanical clocks and internal fortitude. Yet, as the calendar days, faithfully tracked by a collective hand in the community hall, edged closer to the predetermined date of the official sunrise, a distinct, almost tangible psychological shift began to take root. People started moving with a little less resignation. Conversations gained a subtle spark, and a shared, knowing glint began to reappear in the tired eyes of neighbors. It was the first delicate stirring of an ancient hope, a fundamental reawakening of an instinct long dormant in the pervasive gloom. The elders, those steadfast anchors in our sea of darkness, who had quietly reiterated the cyclical nature of life during the bleakest weeks, now began to speak with a more pronounced, almost celebratory certainty about the approaching great day. Their traditional stories, which had previously emphasized survival and resilience in the darkness, now subtly pivoted, shifting focus towards the themes of renewal, of awakening, of the triumphant reemergence of life and light. These narratives, passed down through millennia, spoke not just of physical sunlight, but of the metaphorical dawn of spirits, of communal rebirth. they recounted the joy of their ancestors greeting the first hesitant glimmers, teaching us how to prepare not just our homes, but our hearts and minds for the dramatic transition from shadow to radiance. This buildup of anticipation was less about a concrete, observable change outside our windows, which remained shrouded in perpetual night for many days before the actual sunrise, and more about an internal, emotional, and spiritual recalibration. It was a conscious effort to shake off the inertia of sustained darkness, to shed the accumulated psychological weight of the gloom, and to actively reorient our senses towards the profound stimulus that was about to overwhelm them. Even the smallest details took on new significance. Preparations, both practical and ceremonial, began. Extra fuel was carefully allocated for generators, ensuring ample light for the festivities surrounding the sun's return. Special clothing, long put away, might be dusted off, in preparation for the collective emergence from the long hibernation. Homes, meticulously maintained as our private fortresses, would be readied for visitors, cleaned with a renewed sense of purpose. What we began to discern, subtle yet profound, were the false dawns, the pre-sunrise atmospheric phenomena that subtly hinted at the sun's ascent long before it truly appeared. These would often manifest as fleeting, elusive flashes of an unidentifiable hue, a hint of peach, a streak of pale lavender, blushing briefly against the darkest parts of the southern sky, low on the horizon, only to retreat as swiftly as they appeared, subsumed by the overarching gloom. These were not the actual sun, not even a direct beam, but merely the diffuse high-altitude scattering of light reflecting from an unseen sun still lingering just below the Earth's curve, teasing us with fleeting glimpses of its immense power. For someone unaccustomed to polar extremes, these fleeting light whispers would likely be dismissed or disbelieved. But for us, attuned by 60-odd days of absolute darkness, these false dawns became powerful, almost visceral confirmations of the sun's inevitable return. Each whisper of pale light was celebrated, discussed, and analyzed with an intense collective awe. It was a profound emotional anchor, transforming abstract anticipation into a palpable, almost tactile certainty that the endless dark was indeed finite. These fleeting spectral hues, painting a subtle tapestry on the distant horizon, were a daily affirmation that the light so long missed was drawing near, prompting an internal preparation for the moment when our true celestial anchor would finally, irrevocably, claim its rightful place above the frozen rim of the earth, fundamentally altering our collective reality once more, bringing with it a tide of unimaginable relief. The anticipation of the first sunrise after 65 days of profound darkness was a unique emotional alchemy, a heady concoction of relief, awe, almost childlike wonder, and a profound, wordless sense of reawakening that permeated every soul in our remote Arctic community. This wasn't merely the turning of a day, it was the recalibration of our entire world, a cosmic realignment that marked the end of an endurance test and the beginning of a joyous rebirth. As the precisely calculated date and time drew near, a hushed excitement, palpable as the cold air, settled over the village. The schedule had been communicated widely, gathering points at the edge of town, at the highest vantage points possible, overlooking the precise section of the southern horizon where the celestial event was predicted to unfold. There was no bustling traffic to fight, no elaborate ceremonies to distract. It was a pure, unadorned vigil, a communal act of patient waiting for the return of an elemental force. Despite the relentless cold, people bundled themselves in their warmest layers, parkas, caribou mitts, thick fur hoods, their faces uplifted, breath pluming in frosty clouds, their eyes strained against the horizon, waiting with an intensity that verged on the spiritual. It felt less like simply observing a natural phenomenon and more like welcoming a long-lost, cherished friend back from an impossibly long journey. And then it began. Not with a sudden, fiery burst, not a dramatic explosion of golden light, but with a deliberate, ethereal grace that stole my breath and stirred something deep within my ancient human memory. First, an impossibly faint, almost invisible sliver of luminescence began to stain the deepest black blue of the southern horizon. It was a hue beyond description, a nascent whisper of rose and apricot, so subtle it felt more imagined than seen, teasing the edges of the deepest indigo. This was not the direct sun itself, but the diffuse filtered refracted light reaching us from its distant, rising, unseen edge, a prelude of incredible beauty. As minutes bled into what felt like an eternity, this faint glow intensified, growing wider, gaining color and vibrancy, gradually stretching into a profound, luminous band across the sky. A magnificent arc of purples, violets, deep crimsons, and soft peaches, chasing the deeper darkness higher into the atmosphere. The clouds, which had for so long been a blanket of monotonous gray, now caught these nascent rays, transforming their undersides into soft, glowing embers, painting an ever-changing tapestry of profound celestial beauty above the frozen, indifferent tundra. Our collective gasp was barely audible, swallowed by the vast, open silence of the Arctic. My eyes, so long accustomed to the muted shades of artificial light and pervasive gloom, watered involuntarily, stinging from the unexpected assault of genuine brilliance, yet paradoxically unable to look away, utterly captivated by this nascent spectacle. The sheer depth of color, the infinite variations in hue, felt like an awakening not just for the landscape, but for my very soul. Finally, with a slow, deliberate majesty that defied the very concept of hurried time, the very tip of the sun's disk, a tiny blazing shard of molten gold, tentatively breached the furthest southern horizon. It didn't shoot up. It seemed to pull itself upward, agonizingly slowly, as if with immense effort, refusing to rush the moment of its grand reappearance. It was merely a sliver, a pinpoint of impossible fire, yet its direct, radiant brilliance pierced the prolonged gloom with an intensity that was almost overwhelming, stinging my pupils and filling my eyes with profound, almost painful tears. A collective sigh, deeply emotional, rose from our small, gathered community, a sound not of triumph, but of deep, communal, shared relief, a profound release of 65 days of unspoken tension and whispered fears. The light was palpable, tangible, almost a physical warmth spreading across my chilled face, even though the air remained bitingly cold. It wasn't about the temperature. It was about the feeling of light, its fundamental validation. The darkness was truly, unequivocally, finally broken. Cheers erupted, raw and emotional. Children whooped with a primal joy, and hardened adults openly wiped tears from their weather-beaten faces. Hugs were exchanged, hands clasped, tears of pure, unadulterated relief freely flowed, their saltiness momentarily stinging against chilled cheeks. The simple act of witnessing that returning orb, of feeling its nascent presence, was a profound, almost spiritual affirmation of life itself, a cosmic promise fulfilled. It shattered the psychological confinement of the long night, breaking the chains of gloom, and reminding us with an unforgettable intensity that the universe, however brutal and indifferent, adheres to its ancient rhythms, always offering a path from darkness to light, leaving an indelible memory of pure, unadulterated, triumphant, life-affirming light. The enduring influence of living through the unbroken span of 65 days of polar night extended far beyond the physiological adjustments to the absence of light or the psychological burden of perpetual darkness. For those of us who endured it in our remote Alaskan community, the experience permanently altered our relationship with time, with the elements, and with each other, reshaping our perspectives in ways both subtle and profound, affecting how we perceived the normal rhythm of the world even after the sun gloriously returned. We found ourselves forever recalibrated by the immense temporal distortion of the deep darkness. The rigid, universally accepted progression of clocks and calendars had, for over 2 months, been merely an abstract guide, supplanted by the ceaseless, undifferentiated gray. Even after the sun reclaimed its position, and true day and night returned, my internal clock, and that of many others, never quite reverted to its previous, unquestioning adherence. There was a lingering awareness of the sun as a presence, a force to be cherished and acutely noted, rather than a given backdrop. Its strength, its height in the sky, its mere visibility, became matters of conscious observation, no longer taken for granted. There was a heightened sensitivity to light, a noticeable aversion to excessively bright artificial environments, like those outside in cities, which now seemed offensively glaring, and a profound appreciation for the soft, gentle transitions of true dawn and dusk. The fleeting magic of a clear, bright summer day in Alaska, once a cherished, anticipated season, was now imbued with an almost sacred quality, a period of hyper-awareness and gratitude for every precious moment of light. Beyond this internal, almost biological recalibration, the collective memory of shared hardship created an indelible bond within the community. The acts of mutual aid, the spontaneous generosity, the quiet resilience displayed in the face of existential adversity wove a robust new tapestry of trust and interconnectedness. This was not a temporary alliance. It was a profound reaffirmation of communal identity. Years later, a shared glance with a fellow survivor during a cold winter day, a casual comment about a long, dark night, would be instantly understood, invoking a common, profound history of endurance that outsiders could never truly grasp. This bond extended to a heightened, intuitive sense of responsibility for one another. The vulnerability exposed during the polar night taught us that individual strength was amplified and truly tested by collective compassion and vigilant mutual support. It created a subtle, unspoken agreement to forever look out for those on the margins, those more vulnerable, those whose needs were magnified by hardship, a permanent commitment etched into the fabric of the community. The experience also left a distinct, deep-seated impact on our relationship with the concept of resource scarcity and preparedness. We became, almost universally, more prudent, more forward-thinking, more intensely practical. Our mental larder of preparedness for the next potential crisis was no longer merely a metaphorical concept, but a vivid, visceral, non-negotiable imperative. Every spare generator part, every extra can of food, every full tank of fuel for the snowmobiles, these were no longer just items. They were precious bulwarks against the potential return of extreme, prolonged, unexpected vulnerability. This prudence extended beyond mere material preparedness, transforming into an almost intuitive foresight, an ingrained habit of proactive planning against unseen future adversities. There was an increased appreciation for the knowledge and experience of the elders, their stories no longer just interesting tales, but profound blueprints for resilience and enduring wisdom in the face of nature's relentless unpredictability. They were the living guides, the repositories of wisdom that had carried generations through such darkness. The collective narrative shifted from one of mere survival to one of proud, stoic endurance, a deeply shared identity, defining an unspoken fortitude for those who had lived through the dark. My own character was fundamentally reshaped by it. I emerged from those 65 days with a deepened humility, an enhanced appreciation for the ephemeral beauty of the sun, and a profound, unshakable conviction in the power of human connection against even the most overwhelming, indifferent forces of nature. The polar night was a brutal teacher, yes, but its lessons were indelible, transforming our very understanding of life, light, community, and what it truly meant to carry on when the world outside was perpetually shrouded in an unbreakable, cosmic gloom. The darkness eventually receded, but its teachings remained, eternally illuminating our future.